Today, I'm interviewing a filmmaker, audio maker, teacher, Laurel Parker, and we're going to be talking about not so much the visual filming, but the audio creations that I'm getting very, very excited about getting involved in these days. And this will be a conversation that's particularly useful, I think, for people who are in the industry or wanting to be in the industry, whether writers or creators, but also we always have this theme of changing the world. So the question is, why do this work? Because it's a lot of it's long hours with no money. So let's see what Laurel's got to share with us. We all deserve some applause sometimes, don't we?
Indeed.
So to start with, Laura, let everyone tell, you're in London, aren't you? Even though you have a lovely American accent.
Yes, born and raised in California, but I live in London now.
And where are you working? Tell us about because you're teaching, aren't you? Or lecturing?
I am a senior lecturer, yes, at Ravensbourne University, which is in East Greenwich in London. It's primarily, it's an all-around university, but the film department's I think, is the largest in the university. And I've been teaching there since like 2014 now.
Oh, quite a while. Through all the hard times, through COVID.
Through COVID, yeah. Thank God, because teaching actually saved me, because the hours were the thing that people don't understand. I know it was horrible for the students, but there was so much more work involved in prepping classes to be entirely on screen, and those hours were a godsend, really.
Keep you focused, and you're not just
fed.
Yes, fed, which is also important.
Yeah.
And one other area which is harder to get fed with, which is actually creating content. So, what kind of screen or audio works have you done in the past, and what are you focusing on creating now?
Well, funny enough, during COVID, because I do voiceover work, and I knew that my agent had a barn full of amazing talent, and I knew none of us were working. And I have a producer that I work with a lot, and I thought this is an excellent opportunity to do some audio dramas, some podcasts that are really radio dramas. So we started doing. He launched an arm of his production company called Horror Lab Oral, and we started doing radio drama podcasts that were horror based. So we took existing copyright free stories, and we would I cast the talent, and we record the dramas over Zoom with clean feed, and it was very successful and really fun, and exactly the outlet I think a lot of us needed. And another producer heard our work and was interested, and he has since been hiring us to create historical dramas podcasts that and so we've done quite a lot for him, from kind of made up they all have to have a historical context. So we've done a several part series on the Prohibition era. We've also created kind of a series called History, so it'll be women in history or men in history, and they're like interviews with people who have long since passed, with a modern day reporter, and they just back and forth as if it was a normal interview. So we've created all sorts for this producer, and his company is called Towton Audio. So that's been a great creative outlet and a source of income.
And these are newly created dramas, so newly written, not adaptations.
Correct. Yes, all have been. All of them are new that we've done for Towton Audio, and if they have been adaptations, they've been adaptations from the writer who had for example, the Prohibition one was actually a feature, and then we broke it up into radio and adapted it for audio, and but it was my producer slash writer who did that, and it was his
I,
work.
I'd love to see how that process happened, because obviously that's something I'm looking into at the moment, is going from the visual medium into to the audio and
Yeah.
doing it in a way that really works. So on the sort of adaptation side of things, whether someone's adapting or coming at it fresh, do you find with the students that you teach, is there a preponderance of wanting to make visual features, films, shorts, and to see audio as kind of a sort of second best, or not something that they might have thought of?
It's funny. I used to teach also in the television department, so I'm now exclusively in the film department. None of the film students are at all interested in audio as an art form. We do get, people who want to do location sound, and we do find people who want to do post audio. But I have never run across a student who has come to me or talked about a project that was audio based. On the other hand, I've had television students who have. And that's how it tends to go at Ravensbourne in my experience, is that the television department, although very small, um, tends to have those ancillary roles, people who want to fill those roles, versus the film department, which is really a ton of wannabe directors, a ton of wannabe cinematographers, and then bits and bobs of the rest of the needed production people. So, and I had one student who did their final project, and it was going to be a radio drama, and I don't know how that finished. Sadly, I was super interested in it, and she was a really talented student. But it is not something that comes to Ravensbourne. I know that there are students that are interested in that. I just don't think that Ravensbourne is their calling. I think they go someplace else. They must do.
But do they? Because my question is, I've got the I had a very derogatory view of radio. It's like something I listen to in the car when I'm driving along. And until I started to find out more about it and listen to award-winning radio and audio productions, completely blown away by them. And they're not the kind of things that you would want to listen to whilst doing the cooking for the children or driving the car. They're serious productions with kind of content that you would sit and listen to instead of watching Netflix. So I think, and that came as a real surprise to me, because I didn't even know that was out there. But having said that, a lot of people have realised there's a podcast revolution, partly because of COVID. People started listening to these dramas, and horror has a kind of strong audience in that arena. But my experience is a lot of that relies on voiceover, on getting around the difficulties of the exposition. Fair enough, but it's not the same as telling a story where you're in the story and there's no voiceover giving you any clues. You've got to listen and work out what's going on from that story, which is much more challenging to write, and therefore probably one of the reasons don't hear maybe so much of it. What are your thoughts on that, and on the different choices to people who are thinking, oh, actually I haven't thought about podcasts or writing for radio? There are some quite different big clear differences, shall we say, on those things, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I think for the generations coming up, you and I are old enough to have heard, or have our grandparents or parents or whatever have radio dramas were a big deal, and I love old Hollywood. So most of those people, most of the people who moved into television came from radio drama in the States. So all of the biggest talent had radio shows first. So it was just a natural. It was something I grew up with. I don't think these younger generations are aware of that history. And then I think when they think of podcasts, they tend to think of talking head type podcasts. Yeah. So even when you get the really, really successful Lime Street, Limehouse, the really, really successful ones that blow up, I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't think that that was an anomaly, that that was like some strange, oh, that was a different way
Mm.
to do it. Um, yeah, I just don't think it's in their wheelhouse in the same way they don't know what a cassette is.
Yeah. And I think, and it's fair enough. And I have to be honest, I was kind of in that view, thinking, well, it's a nice thing to do if you've got time to listen to it. But yeah,
Hmm.
how would I, if I'm gonna spend a couple of hours or an hour, I'm gonna want to watch something, aren't I? That would be my natural reaction. But until recently, I was think if it's the right kind of thing, I'm happy to have a blank screen and listen instead, and have
Yeah,
and have an equally visual experience.
yeah.
And that's what was the biggest discovery for me, was that really well made audio drama, you see it in your head. It's a bit like reading a novel, much more clearly sometimes than the version that someone else has
Oh,
created for you for the
absolutely,
screen.
absolutely. Yeah, and you know, now that you've mentioned it, I this didn't even I totally kind of forgot this, but I mean, I was mostly raised by my grandparents, so all of that old stuff. I mean, we actually had cassettes of old radio shows, radio dramas, but I remember spending a ton of evenings with my aunt, and we would turn off all the lights, and she had albums that were stories. Like she had, my favorite was Wizard of Oz, and it was, I think, 4 albums, and I'm dying to. I've looked and looked and looked. So if anyone out there has the albums, I will buy them from you. But and she would play those, and we'd play them in the dark, and we would just lay on the couch and listen. So
So you'd
it's in
listen to the Wizard of Oz like radio, but be looking at the pic. When you, yeah, the list, just listening to, because I thought it was
just
visual
listening.
albums at first, that threw me. But so the actual recorded, like on a record or tape.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was absolutely made on vinyl,
Mm-hmm.
and it wasn't the original cast, so it wasn't just taken from the movie. It was actually an adapted version of Wizard of Oz, completely on an album. There was no book to look at. There was nothing besides these 3 or 4 albums, you know, side A, side B, of the story, and it was it was really good and scary
Mm.
and exciting, much different than the movie, obviously, but I loved it. It was so good. Just laying there in the dark, you know, the two of us listening to the radio drama. It was awesome.
And what you said there about scary, because it is scary actually. It was, I
Hmm.
remember being uh, crying my eyes out with terror as a small child, as the house was being taken away by a storm. But on the whole, I think with audio, it is, in a way, it should be scarier because of the images that you make in your mind. And I'm always amazed how often when I've listened to things that have been an adaptation of a book or even of a film, that I haven't found them very scary, intriguing, suspenseful, but not very few things I've found scary. And yet the medium is ideally suited to that.
Absolutely.
Why do you think that would be? Why is it just you and me and a handful of other people are thinking we can really scare people with this stuff?
Well,
Is it because it's almost too powerful and we don't want to people don't want to go too far?
no, I think, I mean, there's two points that come to my mind. One is the idea of adaptation. I did run into this experience with a script that a writer had written as a visual, and then was adapting it for the radio drama, and I was amazed at how difficult that writer found it to revision it as audio only. And sometimes that meant that the exposition was overdone, and sometimes it meant that
Yeah.
it wasn't there at all, and I would have to go, wait, which character
What's
are we talking
happening?
about? Yeah,
Mm.
yeah, where are we? Um, but I think in terms of people not thinking of audio, I think we're just waiting for the next great thing to bowl us over, something that is truly horrifying. That, because you're right, it's more scary than visual, because it's like reading a book. Anything you imagine is going to be much worse than anything I can create for you as a visual director, like, just period. So you know, as you listen to the voices, you're creating that image of the character. As you hear a noise, you're already imagining, your mind is already creating that room where the characters are in. So you're in it much more intensely than you are if you're watching something I've created for you on screen. I think it's just a matter of time before I think it's going to be some big thing or some big technology that's going to really communicate how powerful and exciting radio. I hate to call them radio dramas because it just sounds so old timey.
Mm-hmm. I
But
like
it
to
is
call
what
it
it is.
sonic cinema. That's my favourite term at the moment.
Oh, sonic cinema.
Because it's
Hmm.
especially if you're looking to do something that is, because I believe sound can be cinematic, and because it is visual, that cinematic doesn't need to be a term that's relegated just for the screen.
Yeah.
That's just my personal view, and I think we both know what that technology is, which we'll get onto in a minute. Also, do you think that particularly with the horror genre for radio and podcasts, there's the horror that's just sort of enjoyable. It's going to be a little bit scary,
Yeah.
but not too scary, and a bit of a frisson. Whereas in the movies, you can have stuff that's really powerful. I'm not into personally sort of mindless splatter stuff, but for me, one of the things I find interesting about the horror genre is you can talk about very serious things that would be that you can explore through horror in on different levels and reach a wide audience in a way that might be quite difficult to do if you're doing it as a straight drama, and that you can tackle difficult subjects. So going back to the whole change the world theme, I think there's different intentions with horror. It can be just to entertain, give someone a frisson, or it can be to really get in deep there and get people thinking about things. And personally, I think it does have that there is that opportunity for the audience that want that, which won't be everybody.
Right.
And before we started this conversation, I was saying I think it's important to let people know in advance what it is that you're creating here. So when you go and watch a film in the cinema, you get a sense of, if it's horror, is it Titan, or is it Evil Dead Rises? They're both body horror, but they're completely different experience.
Yeah.
And if you swap the audience over, they would be probably traumatized and cheesed off by equal
Yeah.
degrees, because that's not what they went there for.
Correct. Yeah.
So, and maybe this is a good time to talk about binaural. So binaural could well be that technology that just lifts audio drama generally, and certainly the horror genre, onto a whole new, what I would call sonic cinema level. It's so immersive, and it's something a lot of people who play games have had experience of. There's might be more sort of ambisonic, but there's something very specific about binaural. What attracted you to that way of recording a drama, or the possibility of doing that going forwards?
Because it's absolutely immersive, and I think absolutely powerful when you combine sound coming at you, where you're living in it as opposed to having it just in front of you, and then you add your imagination to it's ridiculous. I mean, it's just you I don't even think you have to understand the technology
No.
or have heard what we're talking about before to really get the idea that if you're in a room of sound and all of it's you're living it, you're with, and if the
Mm,
characters, it's you're there, you're in it, and it's going to be, when done in combo, I think, with that story that's going to
yeah.
catch, it's going to be something that people just go, what? This
Mm-hmm.
is wow. And I'll bet you there will be aunts and their nieces laying on a couch in the dark listening
Yeah.
to stories
Yeah.
in that same way, in a much more intense and involved way. But I think it will definitely inspire that kind of commitment to listening to stories this way.
And also, I love that idea of aunts and nieces, because I think it's not relegated to people at home on their own with their earpods in. Even though that might be a lot of the audience, I think there's a real opportunity for people to come together into a space, and maybe there's something on the screen that's not distracting, and to be in especially for horror, because people like to be in a shared space. They don't really want to be scared on their on their own,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
there's no reason. And I know that some so they've used it in theatre with that Anna at the National Theatre.
Yeah.
All the audience all hearing what's going on through the headphones, and but still in that communal space.
Yeah.
And I think there's something really that's why I call it sonic cinema, because there's something about bringing people together as well, for still having a
Yeah.
shared experience, even though their individual visual images will be completely different from the next person. I was talking to a sound recordist the other day, and like most people, she doesn't have a kind of deep scientific understanding of what binaural is, but she said she listened to something in her headphones of someone having their hair cut, and she said it was like I was having my hair cut. And it was just a perfect example.
Yeah.
I've listened to the one
Yeah.
where someone's putting a bag over their head, and you feel like you've got a bag going over your head. You don't get that with surround sound, Dolby, 5.2. That's over there, around here. This is like you are in it, and which of course is, gives a creative responsibility, because it could be so powerful that you don't want people being completely traumatized by the experience. So it's finding a balance there. So with I know you had a similar experience to me working with testing out binaural, is that not everybody at every stage of the industry is familiar with it or has the same attitude. Do you find that some sound mixers in particular think it's kind of, well, it's a bit messy because we've got all this background, and they want to clean it all up and turn it into neat tidy stereo, and actually lose the
Yeah.
immersive element?
Yeah. I've had that. I've also had engineers who think they're doing it, but they're not. And I find that because it requires an intense amount more than what a sound engineer is used to dealing with or used to mixing, that can be a hindrance as well, because it's so much more effort, and there's not quite there's not the excitement yet. It's still like a novelty, like virtual glasses or whatever. So I think, yeah, I've run into that a lot with sound engineers who are interested but not really. It's a lot more work,
Yeah,
and they're not going to get more money. And
because it is more work. It is kind of
mhm.
whole new area. Involves a bit of experimentation.
Yeah,
It's not just changing the microphone, the way the
correct. Yeah,
actors perform, the way it's directed, everything. And you're looking to do more sort of directing work in this field.
I love it because again, I think it's like it's incredibly powerful. It's incredibly engaging, um, and it's such a different way to tell a story. The heart of every director is, I love telling stories, and it's its own unique way of telling a story. I At this point, I can't even imagine it with visuals, because I think then you would ruin some of
Yeah,
the
yeah,
magic of it.
I completely agree. Because like when I went to see The Batman, which I absolutely loved, I sat in the cinema, seat was throbbing, had all the sound around me. I didn't need that.
Right.
I didn't need that to be in binaural, because the screen is there. But when
Yeah.
you're listening to audio, you are inside the drama and listening to almost tangible as Macbeth, that you can hear someone coming towards you, and it's not because someone's putting a fader up on the footsteps Foley. It's
Yes. Yeah.
somebody's coming towards you, and that's the point where I thought, "Ooh, this is exciting." But talking about adaptation generally, just to sort of round off, I wanted to ask you, because obviously you're working with students, and you from your kind of not academic but creative perspective, what are the things that people need to be thinking about when they're moving from whether it's a visual or written text to adapt to audio? Because I think it's a much more different medium than most people realize until they
Yeah.
try to do it.
Yeah. I think what I try to think of is, how can you create the space each space. So I try and try to think out of the box, like not just a clock or a fireplace or whatever. But so the idea is in regular, in stereo, in a stereo mix, how are you going to create a room so that right away my audience isn't worried or wondering where am I? They're getting into the action as soon as possible. And then there's that fine line of exposition. How much do I tell? How much can I put in with sound? So I really try to, there's a rule I teach in filmmaking. It's not my original rule. I learned it in grad school, but I think it's wise to avoid a voiceover as much as possible in filmmaking because it's easy. It's an easy way to get across something, and it doesn't challenge you to be more visual. So the rule was always avoid a voiceover until you can't, or unless it's absolutely key. And I think the same is true when creating audio scripts. Is how much can I get away with not telling? How much can I build in sound effects and an environment that tells the story so that I can get to the dialogue or I can get to the action. And so my audience is right away knows where they're at, what's happening, and they can sit back and get ready for the story. That's the challenge, I think.
So it's kind of the sonic world building, so that they're not, that everyone who's listening it knows where they are, and they're not, they know they've got to, they can start to create those pictures in their mind because they're not thinking because the minute you confuse someone they're going to turn off.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But it's also the creative challenge. It's the fun part. What can I add to build this world? What can I what little bits and pieces, what movement, even in drinking or whatever, like what can I add to make it a more complete audio experience, a more complete story? And it's a creative challenge that's unique to this particular field versus any other.
Have you got any examples you can give?
Oh, that's a...
Sorry, just throwing that at you.
I should have figured you were going to come at me. Well, it's an interesting one. I'm doing a piece now for Taunton Audio. It's called Taylor of Florence. And the way it was written was with a voiceover and then the action. And at first I was like, so how do we do that? How do you do... And so it's this character taking you all the way through this story, and he'll have these asides. And I was like, all right, so do we add a real effect to that actor's voice when he's doing the voiceover and when he's in the scene? So that's been really a big challenge. Like, is it mic placement? Is it a combo? And in the end, it's a bit mic placement, it's delivery, it's all of that. And we'll see how successful we've been when we finish the mix. But that's a really good example, I think, of something unique to an audio drama versus a film.
Now, one of the shorts that I'm going to be sending you just to get your views on the adaptation to the audio for the 15-minute. The biggest thing that hit me was it's so succinct in film. So the opening shot are basically two legs swinging past on a rope, and you know what's happened. Done. 30 seconds. How do you do that in audio? You don't just do it with a creak. I mean, that doesn't tell you anything. So as you'll see, it's a scene with a character who is doing something which you hear and you think, oh, he's climbing a tree to rescue a cat, but he's then not rescuing the cat, and then he says a line, and because it's relevant, and I kind of had to build this element in because it's so critical to what then happens with the other characters. And I was not saying that's the best way to do it, but it was a necessary way to translate the function of that scene as much as anything. But it took up a lot more space, and it's quite nice because it's intriguing, so it adds to it, but it's completely different, right at the outset. To totally think in a different way. How do I tell this story? What's the important parts? What am I trying to get across? So I think it really makes you, with adaptation, really go deep into what that story, why you're telling that story, and what's the point. And I think that's a good thing to end on. it's not, we don't just do this to pass the time because it's fun, which it is. Why for you? I mean, in your world, why does it matter to you that we create, whether it's visual or audio drama? What's the point of it all?
Really, honestly, the point of it all is because everyday life is so ridiculously difficult and monotonous and depressing and sometimes not, but stories take you away. They're instead of having a cocktail or having a cocktail with it, it's a wonderful way to not be in your world right now. And sometimes it's a wonderful way to learn more about your world and your everyday life, but they're just necessary. They're just necessary for escapism, for relaxing your mind, for sharing with other people. Oh my god, that story was so good. Oh my god, that movie was so good. It's what do they say, that humans are the only animals that tell stories, and it's been what we've been doing since we came out of the cave, and it's in us. It's just something we have to do, but it's absolutely, I do believe, absolutely necessary for our sanity.
And also, perhaps to go back to those cave days and the stories around the fires, quite often they were partly escapism, but actually more often teaching, weren't they?
Correct,
That's
yeah.
how you learn through teaching, as Steiner Waldorf teacher training teaches, because that stories are how we gain an understanding of the world and of characters. I remember just through reading and literature, I was able to understand people and lives of people I'd never met, and I was at school I'd never, but yet I had an insight into things that I couldn't have
Yeah,
had any other way. And I think there is a very necessary function. So on the one hand, it's absolutely valid for something to be pure escapism. I'll have to say my personal interest is, and particularly with the use of something like binaural sound, is to tell stories that will influence the way people think, the way they feel about
absolutely.
things, give them other perspectives, and with the, just my last question on this, with the students that you have in, what is their main intention, do you think, with storytelling? Are they there because they want to find stories to tell, or are they there because they want to just entertain people and make a living, which is equally valid, and what most of them
Yeah.
will probably end up doing?
Well, hopefully if they're lucky.
Yeah.
um I think it's a combo. There are those, there's one or two students every year that are those classic watch everything, um, eat it all up, love movies, watch them again and again, and want to be part of that, want to tell stories. And then there are those students who come in who, um, you know, really are about branded content, really are about making music videos, and it's more about the shoot than telling a story necessarily, which is great, and that's
Yeah.
fine too. So it's really broad. Maybe we're about 50-50.
That's interesting. That's interesting. And I think also there's a lot of people who'll do the branded content, make a living, but they're on the side, they're trying to set up that short film or that feature that they, which is more kind of, shall we say, heart driven. Yes. so
Yeah,
so thank you so much, Laurel. That's really useful and valuable, and I'm really grateful for you spending time and sharing some of your knowledge with me. And I look forward to
oh, thank you.
hearing. Oh yeah, and with people, I'll be sending you links so you can put links in. But are there particular maybe that you'll be able to put a link in for those horror podcasts, if that's possible, that
I'd
people
love to.
can
Yeah, yeah,
access
yeah.
those? That would be great. Thank you so much.
Thank